Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Beatles Forever. In our last episode, we saw the Beatles go to Houston, where there were fans that were out of control. Then they made their way to Chicago, where a fan named Georgeanna met Mal and the Beatles. I'm sure that was a memory she never forgot. Mal and the Beatles had a bit of trouble in Minneapolis, and they were on their way to Portland. They had a plane that was on fire while they were in flight. Next, they got to California, where they hoped to enjoy themselves, but the Beatles' place they were renting was spilled to the public, and the fans kept trying to see the Beatles. So Mal was kept plenty busy working with security to keep the Beatles safe. Mal understood the fans and how they felt because he was a big Elvis Presley fan. And on the night of August 27th, Mal and the boys met Elvis Presley at the King's Bel Air mansion. The 30-year-old superstar was in town for the film shoot associated with Paradise Hawaiian Style. Before meeting the king, Mal had spent time with Colonel Tom Parker at his Paramount Studios office, where the roadie got gifts, a gold-plated cigarette lighter, and to his utter glee, a white bathrobe emblazoned with girls, girls, girls. Mal appreciated the colonel's generosity, and he also found out that the Parker was pretty smart. He stated he was wrong every dollar he can out of the Elvis situation, and who can blame him? Mal was resting in the colonel's office that day. The telephone rang. Tom told Mal it was the news agency. It looks as though word has got out about Elvis and the boys meeting tonight. There's a story in the London Daily Mirror. Now Reuters wants confirmation. Mal's heart froze. He thought for a moment that Parker was going to call the whole thing off. The colonel, though, wasn't to be deterred. The Memphis Mafia, who were a group of Presley's friends and employees who served and protected the king at his beck and call. The colonel instigated a complex system by which they changed vehicles several times before arriving at Benedict Canyon. As Tom Parker looked on, Mal, Neil, Tony Barrow, and the Beatles got into the black limo, with Alf sitting behind the wheel. For once, Mal later said, John, George, Paul, and Ringo were ready to leave on time, and they climbed into the waiting cars at the bungalow, bang on the spot. Shouting "Roll 'em" out of his car window, Alf followed the colonel's vehicle as it made its way through Hollywood, and the convoy followed by a police motorcycle unit. By 10 p.m., the motorcade had arrived at Elvis's house at Perugia Way. The colonel's plan had worked. NIMS Chris Hutchins was there that night. Mal and the Beatles went inside Elvis Presley's home. Elvis and Priscilla were sitting in the center of the horseshoe couch in the den, the king and his secret bride-to-be cozily at home. Hutchins wrote, he was wearing a red shirt and close-fitting black jerkin, the high Napoleonic collar rising above his sideburns. Priscilla was pure Hollywood starlet. Her black bouffant towered above her forehead, and she was heavily made up with thick black mascara, midnight blue eyeliner, red blusher, and heartbreak pink lipstick. As Mal, Neil, Alf, and Tony followed the Beatles, they couldn't have possibly missed a member of the Memphis Mafia standing around the room in all their glory. At least 9 men strong. They doubled the Beatles' entourage. Mal was beside himself. He felt reverence and shock. He wrote, it was the day of my life I shall never forget. It is the day when the two biggest phenomena in showbiz met for the one and only time. After being served a large scotch and coke by one of the king's minions, Paul called Mal over to meet his idol in the flesh. Presley turned and they shook hands. Paul said, this is your number one fan, El, and he's with us. Mal was thunderstruck by the sound of the king's strangely quiet voice as he said, sure, pleased to meet you, to the roadie. Mal looked around Elvis's home as the evening wore on and was wowed by it. It was luxurious, well-stocked cocktail bar and lounge. It had thick carpeted rooms, and in the den a massive fireplace with a copper chimney disappearing into the ceiling at the center of the great room. Pretty soon the record player was working full blast, Mal wrote. And then Elvis played a whole lot of albums, many of them the Beatles, but modestly perhaps did not play any of his own. The noise was terrific, the drinks were flowing, the talk was animated, and as I say, it was just like being at home with the lads from Liverpool. Mal later said that it was so casual and informal at this party that not even a photograph was taken. Elvis later picked up a bass guitar that was plugged into an amp positioned near the television set. Mal wrote he began to strum away on the thing, playing quite amply, but insisted that he was only learning. Paul said, keep practicing, fella. You'll get to the top yet. As Mal looked on, they suddenly came up with an unrecorded jam session of all time. Mal said Elle found some guitars for George, John, and Paul, and a set of bongo drums for Ringo, as they began to make the place rock with an hour of improvised beat music. It was fabulous. It's like, wow, I wish someone had recorded that session. There was only one hitch, Mal later reflected. Nobody had a plectrum. Paul said, Mal's got a pick. He's always got picks. He carries them on the holidays with him. Only Mal didn't bring his well-traveled doctor's bag, which he had the pigs in. So he briskly went into the kitchen, where he made pieces of plastic cutlery into makeshift plectrum. As the evening continued, more guests started to arrive. Elvis played the genial host, Mal wrote. He himself sipped ice water all night, since he neither drinks or smokes, and was at pains to make sure everyone enjoyed themselves. Tried playing pool, losing 4 straight games to the members of the Memphis Mafia, while John lost $9 at roulette with Colonel Parker and Brian Epstein, who had joined us on getting back from New York. In one of Mal's favorite memories of that night, John pretended to be a reporter. Once when I was talking to Elle, sitting on the settee, John came screaming to us and jabbed an imaginary microphone under Elle's nose and began to fire off a string of meaningless questions, which I must say were pretty accurate takeoff of some of the daft things that interviewers ask us at our own press conferences. What are you going to do when the bubble bursts, Elvis? He asked. What toothpaste do you use? What time do you go to bed? Do you like girls? Who's your favorite artist? Yeah, chuckled Elle. I've heard 'em all before. By 2 a.m., the party started to wind down. The Beatles and their entourage said their goodbyes. As they climbed into their limo, Tony remembered Mal's face glowing with happiness because Elvis, his cherished rock and roll idol, had called him Sir. It hardly mattered to the roadie that the king addressed nearly everyone that way. The Beatles wrapped up their Benedict Canyon hiatus with a pair of gigs at the Hollywood Bowl. At the conclusion of the second show on August 30th, Mal observed in amazement as the girls flung themselves into a moat dividing the stage from the vast open auditorium of the bowl. And as soon as the boys dashed off the stage, colossal fountains were switched on full blast to deter more determined moat swimmers from reaching the battlements of the stage, so to speak. It made for a bizarre scene, to be sure, but nothing could have prepared them for the onslaught the next day in San Francisco. The Beatles' first show at the Cow Palace erupted into a near riot. The Beatles were hit with jelly beans, teddy bears, and similar things. At one point, a security guard was even knocked unconscious after being hit in the head by a bottle. In the end, more than 24 girls had to be hauled off stage, while a male fan managed to breach the scaffolding behind Ringo and make a run at his kit. After the first show was over, with Joan Baez, who had traveled from Los Angeles with us, and country and western style singer Johnny Cash looked in for an hour. But the atmosphere was tense and electric, and for once the Beatles were not looking forward to their next show. Things soon got worse, as with the afternoon show, the venue was jam-packed for the nightcap. Local radio stations had already shared harrowing stories of the earlier gig during their broadcasts. Mal didn't want a repeat of the afternoon spectacle, so he double-checked the crash barriers and the exits, feeling cautiously optimistic when he observed that a solid wall of police were posted in front of the stage. In the end, it hardly seemed to matter. The Beatles opened with Twist and Shout, and it seemed as if the whole building rocked as the teenagers began to spill forward, Mal wrote. I could see the crash barrier starting to give way under the weight of the onslaught, and determined though they were, it looked as though the police lines might collapse. In advance of the second show, Mal had been especially concerned about the 15-foot-high wire mesh fence behind the stage. Incredibly, the fans just hoisted each other up and clambered over, oblivious to the cuts, bruises, and broken limbs as they fell from the top. Paul was almost torn off the stage by a girl who grabbed him, while another nearly hauled Ringo from his drums. The show went into mayhem, Mal said. Neil, Alf, myself, and the GAC officials, and even Brian Epstein were now on stage, trying to protect the boys, keep the show going, and throwing off the stage intruders as they kept coming. And that's when Captain David Hansen, the San Francisco police chief, shouted to Mal, "If we don't get this lot under control, we'll have to stop the show." By this time, the stage and everywhere looked like a war zone. Unconscious teenagers being dragged out of the audience, Mal wrote, and then we hauled them on stage for safety. Some were in terrible state, bruised, battered, and cut and unconscious. Their clothing was torn and their hair disheveled. We put them backstage, where the casualties mounted into the hundreds as the show went on. A chain of policemen organized to get them to the first aid center, and at one point a fan threw a metal folding chair on stage. How crazy is that? Eventually the situation became simply too dangerous for the band to continue. Captain Hansen told Brian, "It's no good. You'll have to cut the show. Only one more song." As the casualties mounted, Mal prepared to get the Beatles to safety. Sobbing girls lay slumped against the walls or huddled into the corners, he wrote. And I caught a glimpse of Joan Baez trying to revive some of them with smelling salts. Every artist in the show was backstage helping out and trying to get the fainting youngsters back on their feet. When the concert finally ended, the Beatles dropped their instruments, ran from the stage, and climbed into an enclosed freight truck to make their escape. Afterward, pandemonium broke out in the auditorium. Mal wrote, and I thought the whole place was going to collapse around us, but somehow the police managed to keep the tide at bay. All the exit doors were thrown open, and the people were hustled out. The scene behind them was of devastation, with seats overturned, people still trying to get onto the stage, and more people fainting. By the next morning, the Beatles and their entourage were winging their way back to London. I bet they were happy to get out of there. But all the things that went wrong in the tour would not so quickly be forgotten. Brian chalked up the chaos and violence to lack security, but it was more than that, Mal realized. He had long felt that there was a dark side to Beatlemania, that not all the attendant hysteria could be understood as the simple byproduct of fandom. When Mal got back home, Mal's reunion with Lil and Gary was tempered by the infrequency of his correspondence and by the odd scraps of paper his wife found in his suitcase, addresses and telephone numbers, invariably written in a feminine hand, from the pen pals he met on the road. Mal said there wasn't anything significant, but Lil knew better. She later said, "It used to break my heart." Mal and his family were still having financial difficulties in the autumn, and he decided to write a memoir to tell the band's story of the recent tour from his perspective. He worked with Michael Borissow of Southern News Services out of Maidstone, Kent. He dictated a 37,000-word manuscript entitled Beatles USA. Mal didn't want to risk his relationship with the boys, even if it meant earning some much-needed side income. He told Borissow that he had the Beatles' approval to proceed with the project, and indeed, each of the boys provided a foreword to his story. Paul McCartney wrote, "Malcolm always was a talented boy. He has worked hard, and if he works well this term, I feel sure he'll move up a class. I knew him when he was nothing, and he was still unassuming and a great one with the kiddies. Yes, I would recommend him for a post in your organization without another word. I would, before I close, like to thank all the people who have made all this possible. The Post Office of Liverpool, the patrol attendants along England's long roads, and most of all, Lily of Allerton. Thanking you, Paul." Ringo Starr wrote, "Malcolm, Malcolm, now let me see. Malcolm, at least it will be the truth when you read what is written by Malcolm. Malcolm, good Malcolm, nice Malcolm, Ringo." George Harrison said, "If we paid Mal more money, then he probably wouldn't need to do things like this book. But seeing as he does need the money, and also with Mal being along on every trip with us, the book naturally is more factual than had someone else written it. Therefore, I hope I enjoy reading it as much as you do. George." Leave it to George to bring up the money situation. John Lennon wrote, "Dear Malcolm, I hope you get better soon, and also your devoted servant," with a question mark. Yours, actually, John. P.S. I like the drawings, too. The book had an assortment of tour photographs by Leslie Bruce as potential illustrations, and a film still from Help depicting Mal and his star turn as a channel swimmer. Borissow presented the roadie story to the whimsy of the commercial marketplace, and there it became unsuccessful, and no one wanted it. So I will end the video here. In this episode, it was fascinating to hear about the Beatles and Mal and their entourage meeting Elvis Presley. I've always liked Elvis and his music since I was a kid, just like I have the Beatles. To have them meet each other was special. Elvis had inspired the Beatles to rock and roll music, and I'm grateful for that. I'm also glad that Mal got a chance to meet his idol. I bet he felt like he was in a dream. The dream of that meeting ended with a nightmare when they did their last American shows. When they did their shows, Beatlemania was out of control. The fans were unreal. And you would think that they would just be glad to see and hear them playing instead of screaming, fainting, and getting hurt trying to climb barriers. And then one fan threw a metal fold-up chair on stage, and that was crazy. I can see now why the Beatles didn't want to tour anymore. And I felt bad that Mal's book didn't get any takers. He had a great idea about being around the Beatles and telling their story from his viewpoint. So, as I had mentioned one time before, I have some Amazon items in the description, and if you're interested in any of them, click on the link and it will take you to the Amazon site. If you buy anything, I get a small commission from Amazon at no extra cost to you. Well, I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you haven't subscribed, if you could do so, it would help the channel to grow, as well as giving it a thumbs up. It's all a great help. And if you haven't clicked on the notification bell, if you could do that, it lets you know when a video is posted. But more importantly, I want to wish everybody a good day, and tune in again soon to the Beatles Forever. Thank you. Bye.